Today we are talking about Advanced Chess Tactics by Lev Psakhis. And the first thing I'd like to do is give thanks, because you should not be sniffing this book if you are below 2,200 FIDE. You should not be sniffing this book if you are not willing to dedicate a large amount of time and energy to the study of it. And therefore, I'm certain this book won't have the same broad appeal that a more generalized chess book would. So we have to give thanks. Many players might not know of Psakhis, but I see him as a kind of the way Nepo is now, a tactical sorcerer. And he had two great results, winning the 1980 and 1981 Soviet championships. The latter with Kasparov, and you can read Kasparov's Side of the Tale in Test of Time, one of the greatest chess books of all time. And I kind of wish we had Psakhis' take as well. Back then, it was a real pantheon of Soviet greats playing in those tournaments. Amazing. So I had the honor of doing a training camp with Psakhis in 2009. And that was, we were all sitting at a table with GMs Josh Friedel, Vinay Bhatt, a young Samuel Shankland, a young Danya Naroditsky. So just a beautiful group of minds there. Fascinating to see their human takes on a lot of the material that I think then went into this book. We also looked at other stuff like people's games as well. Let's get into the book. And the book is organized by structures/openings, right? And I find that really interesting and instructive. And I think a good comparison to draw is the book I recently reviewed, which was, I call it 45 Ways to Crush Your Opponent Positionally. This book, 45 Techniques of Positional Play. And that is meant for a more general audience. You know, that could be for if you're around 16 to 2,000, though I also found it very useful. And the reason I compare it to that book is that book gives you some strategic ideas of how to play certain positions. And then here with this book, we're doing a more advanced thing where we're looking at the tactics that arise out of certain kinds of openings and structures, right? And what's interesting to me about that is I've noticed in myself and in other players that if you play an opening or a structure long enough, you can be very good at it. And being good at it is not just the strategic stuff, but the tactical stuff, and in a lot of ways, the interweaving between those two. And I notice whenever there's a problem that has a French structure, I do much better on those than I do in other structures, for example. And I've seen friends of mine who are King's Indian players, they get those structures a lot quicker too. So you can get good at these structures, and studying a book like this is, of course, a stepping stone to doing just that. The other one, the main one, being going over your games, right? Okay, so let's take a look at an example, and that's this beautiful position here that I really, really enjoyed. And let's talk about it positionally before we do anything else. White has a beautiful knight carving out these two dark squares. Okay, unopposed light square bishop. And in a lot of ways, if I'm just thinking about this position for myself, that would be my main focus. Like, how can I use this asset in my position? If I can get an initiative on the light squares, well, that would be great. Okay, we should also note that this bishop is conceivably beautiful, and that bishop wants all of its pawns on the light squares so that it can be the mortar to the light square bricks of the pawns, right? So what would be black's next move? E6, for sure. Blunting this guy and making it so that that dark square bishop can really move around nicely. The next thing I think I want to point out is this bishop's kind of hitting a rock, and that's just a nice thing in the white position. Now, every chump GM, including myself, would probably play without thinking too long about it, bishop d2. And one of the issues with that move is it's not terrible, but you are giving black the opportunity to play e6. And then you still have to ask yourself, well, what is it I'm doing? What is it I'm doing in this position? It's a little hard to say. So in this game, Psakhis plays a great move, bishop f4. Now, the general rationale, I think, would be to say, well, if black moves their queen, we could play at the very least bishop e5, and that's a much better version than the bishop being on d2. Okay, so the big question then is, well, what if they take? And we take back. Notice we got rid of this knight, which was blocking our light squares. And let's just look at the light squares for a second. There's more than just this one. There's this one. We're threatening knight g6 now. There's this one. There's this one. There's this whole light square stuff going on here too. So Psakhis does something that I think I've been in a similar situation, is like, well, the only thing I need to worry about, the only thing is e6. If black achieves this, next move plays knight d5, they're going to be fine. They're just going to be fine. In the book, Psakhis gives this as a question, like, what would you do here? And I spent a significant amount of time here not really coming up with the right and beautiful answer. I had a answer that led to maybe a small advantage, but nothing spectacular. So let me show you this beautiful variation here that he gets into. And I just so aesthetically and beautiful and instructive. So snip. Snip, check to the miserable king. Now the black king has some choices. Rook f7 we'll look at in a second, but king h7, and here's the incredible beauty with knight g6. Now, what I especially like about this, I saw this actually, and I saw that king takes queen to f5 was a nice mate, but there's a weird sense of like, well, this rook is kind of looking at me, I'm down a rook, what do I actually got? And the brutality of it is there's no way to stop our queen coming to the light square. And then there's no space for the king to go to. And even if knight d5, I'm still playing queen e4, and there's nothing. There's nothing. So I'm down a rook, but I'm completely dominating the light squares. Beautiful, beautiful example. What I like about this is, like, in order to justify bishop f4, which is a positional idea, you have to have some kind of sense of what you do against e6. Let's look at the rook f7 move and a-b. Oh man, beautiful. And again, it's the light squares. Rook e8, we take this thing. Queen takes, we're down a piece. But ba6, if you wanted to, you could be nervous in this position with white. You could be like, well, I'm down a piece. But notice, this piece is a chump. And we still, even though our bishop's gone, our attack is still on the light squares, right? This bad boy, too. I'll quickly show how the game went. Black played king h7. And then, unfortunately, this happened. This happened. Oh, it's so delicious. The rook on a8 is hanging, of course. Bang. And then black played king g8, after which white is at least clearly better. But just this is a fun variation too. Light squares. Boom. Oh, baby. Check. Light squares. Light squares. Beautiful. There's a lot of examples like this. The best ones, I feel, are ones where Psakhis himself is playing, simply because in those games you get a clear sense of his voice, of what he thought was going on in the positions and the practical problems there to solve. A typical issue with chess books these days is that they want the editor wants them to be computer checked. And then the problem there, and this is, I'm going to just end with this critique of the book, and this, many books have this following problem, is the critique then is that when you do the computer, I lose the voice of the human. And that's really what I'm most interested in. I can turn on the computer at any point, right? I want to see and hear the human voice explain to me, someone much higher, much, a much better player than me is Psakhis, and then can explain stuff to me in human words about how they saw the position. That's what I'm interested in hearing and learning. In a kind of similar way, the editors disguise the voice of Psakhis. So I have a mild memory of how the guy talks, and he doesn't use words like pusillanimous. In fact, I'm not even sure how to pronounce the word pusillanimous. I'm pretty sure I've never heard somebody say that word in conversation, pusillanimous. Okay, but there's a lot of SAT words like this in this book, and I'm like, oh, Psakhis didn't say that. So the computer and that kind of editorializing robbed a little bit of the voice of the guy. But I still very much enjoyed the book and still got a lot out of it, especially the idea that there's various structures, the tactics come out of them, and then the book kind of allows me to practice those structures. For example, I've been experimenting with IQP structures. My whole life I have, but I'm really into it now. Great chapters in that, hanging pawns as well. To end, a big question is, should we add this to the dojo training program? I have to convince the other senseis to bring this in. We have a lot of material in the upper cohort, so, do we keep bringing more and more? And what we're discovering is to advance, to make progress once you're over 2200, you need a lot of tactics, you need a lot of repetition, a lot of deep work, sweat work. And this book actually ends with 50 problems that I thought were very difficult. And, definitely that's the kind of thing that the program needs. So there it is, Advanced Chess Tactics by Lev Psakhis. Check it out.